back, everyone, to the PMR pod. This is episode 26. This marks half a year, 6 months. I'm really, really excited for this episode. My name's Andrew. I'm an alcoholic and an addict, and excited to have another guest this week.
Welcome back. My name is Mitch. I'm an alcoholic addict. Episode 26, 6 months doing the podcast, which is pretty insane. Started all the way back in August. And today we do have a very special guest. His name's Joe Legolvan, otherwise known as Mental Health Fitness Dad on Instagram. He is a mindset and fitness coach as well as a sober coach. He posts a lot of great content and helping the recovery community. And we met through Instagram, actually. First person that we have on the podcast that I haven't met in person, which is pretty cool. That's the whole goal of the podcast, is to meet through, connect and grow the community in, the 21st century way, kind of through social media and sharing our message that way. So it's great to meet you over Zoom. Hopefully we could meet at some point in person, but welcome to the show, Joe.
Yeah, right on. I appreciate it, guys. Where exactly are you guys located?
I'm in Boston.
We're on the opposites. He's in Boston and I'm in LA.
Oh, wow. Yeah, we're getting two sides of two different, different personality, East Coaster from West Coaster. So
yeah, it's funny actually, because I grew up in the East Coast, but I am becoming more of a West Coaster, fortunately or unfortunately. And then aren't you you said you're in Mountain Time, so where are you at there?
Colorado. So I'm right in between, man. Yeah, I've got a little type A and a little type B. So I'm just like that. I honk at people sometimes and when I drive, but not all the time, so it's that kind of middle path there.
Love that.
As the Buddha would say.
Yeah. So we've been talking for a little while and decided to have you on, and basically we just we'll jump right in and hear about your journey, where you've been, how did you get there, and what are you doing today, what are you doing these days in terms of fitness coaching, because we like that blended recovery. Recovery looks different for everyone, and there's not one way to do it. And so I'm super interested to hear from you, what your experience has been with yourself and family and friends throughout your recovery journey.
No, I appreciate that. And I love being able to tell my story, because I think there's multiple dimensions that I think people can probably relate to in different ways. So I grew up in a group of friends who really got into drugs pretty intensely growing up. And just this last year, I had two friends die of overdoses, which, is obviously heavy. And it's just kind of permeated through our whole little friend culture growing up. And of course, I was definitely part of that. I loved partying, hanging out, having fun. And really, when I was younger, I didn't start hearing about recovery, hearing about being sober, like in my 20s or my 30s or whatever. It was actually when I was a real young dude. I was like 5 or 6, and my parents were both in recovery. And so they would bring me to AA meetings. And I remember sitting in AA meetings when they would chain smoke in AA meetings, and I'm like 5 or 6, probably inhaling God knows how many secondhand smoke cigarettes.
Yeah.
And I remember there was a guy there, this big biker dude, and he was talking about how big his ego was getting. He goes, my ego was huge. My ego was huge. And I just remember as a 6-year-old going, man, I see this big ass eagle this guy keeps talking about. Because I, didn't know what he was talking about ego. I thought he was talking about a giant eagle. I'm thinking of a bird with my little tiny mind. So I guess I've always been exposed to this world a little bit. And when I hit about 20, I remember I was with a buddy and we were going to go pick up some opiates. We're really into that. And I've always been on a spiritual tip. I love spirituality. I love self-improvement. And I've always had that inclination, probably from kind of how I grew up with 2 recovering addict parents or whatever. And I remember I was talking to him about life is just so great. We're connected to God, we're connected to each other. But I was on some tangent, how you get on those when you're in that world. And he looked at me and he goes, if you really believed that, do you think you'd be getting pills with me right now?
Mm.
And I was like, shit. This dude who is also an addict just called me out. And I remember that was the point. It was a pivotal moment of my life where I go, yeah, am I going to walk my walk, or am I going to like just, am I going to really live out the things I truly believe in my heart? Because I do believe these things. Or am I going to just kind of play with it? And in the Instagram world, in the social media world, everybody loves reposting positive quotations, positive mindset stuff. And I love that, right? It's amazing. It's a super positive place to be in a lot of ways, especially if you surround yourself with positive people that you follow. But I think in this world where we have endless knowledge, endless information, we need more examples. We need to literally see people who have changed their lives, who are living it
Mm.
day by day, who are practicing what they preach. And so for me, I try to post every single day. I do about 5 to 10 stories every day, explaining what I'm doing, what I'm going through that day, what my struggles are, whatever. And as I show up consistently, I think it gives hopefully inspiration to other people to show up consistently as well. Because obviously not perfect, still have my issues, still have my struggles. But if I'm there every day, consistently trying my best, it just kind of keeps me on that path a little bit. So yeah, I mean that's a little tangent there, but I don't know. Do you guys have any questions around that at all?
Yeah, I think that's an important like the action piece, like especially when it comes to like posting and stuff like that. I think like the social media lens of it is a lot of like maybe people posting things and not really even acting on that and not really following through on that. Like it's pretty easy for me or anyone to like type something out and it looks good and I post it and it's like, yeah, that's pretty cool. But if if there's no action behind that, or if that's not actually what you're doing and stuff, it can be, you know, I mean, it was for what then? You know what I mean? If you're not even doing what you're quote unquote, I hate to say preaching, but like if you're not even doing what you're posting and stuff like that, then it's kind of pointless. And I think that for a lot of people, it can be hard. I know when I first started like the PM recovery thing, like I really wasn't working a program. It was like 2020. And
Mm.
I started it off the urge of wanting to um, find a community for one. And I was feeling alone and I wanted to not feel alone by interacting with other people that are sober in recovery online.
Yeah,
But I wasn't necessarily doing what I was posting, and so that can be
Right.
that can be kind of like a mind fuck to you.
sure.
And it can be kind of deceitful. And so I like what you post because you're like in the gym, you're working out,
Mhm.
or you'll like be in the car driving to the gym or driving to something, talking about stuff.
Mhm.
So I like that from what you post.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And ultimately that's kind of my accountability a little bit with it, right? Because then I will put myself out there, I'll put myself in these situations. Like one of the things I'm really big on is putting ourselves out of our comfort zone. And one of the things you just said is like I didn't want to be alone, right? And like I don't know if you guys have ever heard that study, Rat Park. You guys ever heard of that study?
No.
So
No.
there was a study on addiction with rats where
Oh,
they
I think I
gave,
heard.
yeah, it's a trip. But if anybody's ever heard of this story, I just think I find it so fascinating. So they took these rats, they gave them like I think it was like cocaine and
Hmm.
water and food, isolate them in a cage. And when they were isolated, like 90% of them became addicts and literally killed themselves and overdosed. Then they did the same experiment, same cocaine, same water, same food ratio, and they put them in a giant park where they would associate with other rats. They had little rat mazes, they had little things to do, little rat activities, and ultimately those rats only like 10 or 20% of them became addicted. So the ratio
Hmm.
dropped by an extremely significant number. And when you're talking about like wanting to pull yourself out of isolation and wanting to get around other community and other people, to me that's like part of the gym. That's part of the recovery groups that like I just love and I promote, and just like talking to you guys right now, right? Like iron sharpens iron, because none of us got it figured out. I don't got it figured out, but if I'm around people that can see my blind spots and kind of vice versa, I think it's really really beneficial, and I do think it will increase the chances of people living their best life, right?
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
When I hear you say like, when I heard you say like how you were going off on that spiritual tangent when you're picking up, I don't know what you're picking up, oxys or perks or whatever you were picking up,
mhm,
like,
mhm,
um, it just brought me back to it. I couldn't help but like just smile and nod because, anybody who knows, who knew my kind of take on addiction in college, like I was on that same shit. Like I
yeah,
was, I was reading books and getting in touch with God and meditating, and I was doing all this stuff, like, but it was all like I was never doing it in my right mind. I was doing it when I was high, and like
mhm,
it was like I was talking the talk, but I wasn't really, like, when it came down to it, like I looked at my life and I felt miserable most of the
mhm,
time. Like, and I wanted, instead of like wanting to dive deeper into spirituality, like I would talk about it, but my real urge and my, like, the thing that I really wanted to do was just disappear, like,
mhm.
and numb myself. I didn't want to
Right,
actually dive deeper into spirituality. Like I could talk anyone's ear off about it, but
right,
I
right.
didn't have like any real. So when you talk about like walking the walk versus just, talking shit, like, that's I think one of the things that we do like in recovery is when we start living the way that like aligns with our morals, we start actually walking the walk. Like,
Right.
um, and if it's all right with you, like, I'd love to hear a little bit more about, like, what that process looked like where, in as much detail as you want, but like
Mhm.
when we got, you know, how it was in addiction versus, what happened and what triggered, like, okay, like, what triggered the beginning of that recovery process for you.
So what triggered it's an ongoing thing. And I think there's a paradox there, like we're talking about, because there is one aspect of us that we want to walk the walk and we want to make sure we're doing what we say we do, right? But on the other end of the spectrum, realizing that we're not perfect. And
Mm,
if we are waiting to be perfect in order to teach or in order to share what we've learned in life, we're also not going to do that either because nobody's perfect, right? And so there's a paradox there between the two. And I think it's an ongoing journey for me is just basically sharing, hey, this is what worked for me at these levels, at these, different addiction levels that I was at. And a big thing for me too was replacing addiction with positive habits. And sometimes we'll say like, oh, the gym can become an addiction, or and I would argue that that's probably true in some instances. But to me, I love the definition of addiction is something you do that harms yourself that you'll do anyway because you're addicted to it. And so
mm,
if you're doing something that actually is benefiting yourself, I would just call that a positive habit, right? So replacing a negative addiction with a positive habit. So for me, I remember there was a point, and you had mentioned oxys. Those things are expensive, especially back in the day when you're, your early 20s and you're making $10 an hour. But they're about a dollar a gram or dollar a milligram or however it worked. And so,
mm-hmm,
you'd spend a lot of money on those. And I remember there was a point when I was like, God, I just can't be spending this money anymore. And I was at the gym and I was lifting. And I remember thinking, if I just do 10 more reps, I can get that same endorphin high that I would get from the drugs. And I did. And I literally did. I was like, oh, crush it out. And I was like, wow, I feel great. I feel good. I'm like, and that was cheaper. So it wasn't even some deep spiritual thing like, oh, I got to get sober. It was more like, man, I want to be high, but I just want it to be a cheaper high. That makes sense. So a lot of times I look at, my journey of a lot of times people talk about like purpose over pleasure, seeking purpose over pleasure. And that's a huge, amazing statement. I love that mindset. But really, I look at it as long-term pleasure seeking because at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with pleasure. There's nothing wrong with living a pleasurable life. Like to me, that in a sense is kind of the ultimate goal of life is to be here, be enjoy, be in love. I think that's why the creator created this experience for us, like in a big random, tangent. I think is for our joy. But if we're seeking short-term pleasures, and pleasures that only last like a split second, but ultimately create long-term pain, we're just not doing it intelligently. And the intelligent way to do it was to seek short-term pain for long-term pleasure, right? Like the short-term pain of a workout for the long-term pleasure of feeling those endorphin rush all day long, or the short-term pain of eating healthy for the long-term pleasure of feeling good for 6 hours after you ate that salmon salad or whatever, right? As opposed to eating a donut where my pleasure is 2 seconds and then I feel like crap for 6 hours. So at the end of the day, it's really just intelligently seeking pleasure in a more longer sense and a more longer term way. And so, yeah, that's been a big part of it is trying to intelligently seek pleasure and do the things that I know long term will make me feel better. And I love the quote of compassion or self looking at your future self and having compassion for your future self is so important. You know, a lot of times, especially addicts are very empathic. Like they're very empathic about what's going on in the world and all these people suffering and blah, blah, blah. And they take on so much of that emotional energy. But are they being empathic to their future self? Because a lot of times they'll totally screw over their future self. Um, and I spent about 10 years as a spiritual counselor in the Denver jails. And I was talking with inmates, and I did that part of my recovery, just part of my way of giving back. You know, I didn't get paid or anything like that for it, but we would do it about twice a week, and I talked to inmates. And what I really realized deeply was I was expecting to find these men who had just bad morals. They were just terrible people. And I was going to tell them to be better, like be a better person, blah, blah, blah. What really happened was I found some of the most guilt-ridden, shame-filled individuals that once we were able to kind of work on that shame and guilt and really try to see them for who they were, because you know we're all a piece of God at the end of the day. We're all you know, eternal pieces of love. And when I was able to see them as that, past their little ego identity of shame and guilt, they would actually rise to the occasion, because a lot of time it's self-sabotage that we're doing to ourselves. You know, we're actually screwing over our future selves because we hate our future selves. And the reason we hate our future selves is because we feel so guilty about our present self. You know, so once you remove that guilt, once you're able to self-forgive, it's really, to me, that's the start of recovery, is self-forgiveness, looking at yourself and being able to not hold those things against you, not hold the guilt, the shame. And once you're able to kind of release that and realize, hey, I'm not perfect, I am going to mess up, but here's where I'm at, here's where I'm growing, and trying to share that out, and ultimately living the best version of your life for yourself, because you do love yourself, right, in a deep way, and of course for all those around you as well.
I love that. And that's amazing work. That's hard work, that going into the jails and stuff like that. Definitely it takes a special person to be wanting to do that. And so thank you for doing that. And two parts to that for me is that I think I agree with you about the that cycle that we can get caught into on the shame and guilt. It's kind of like, I was thinking like that's a fourth step, you know, in terms of AA, like going through trying to do that. It's like, but there's another part too, you know, there's like the accountability part, because, you know, because I don't know if the guys that you were talking to were addicts or alcoholics, but for me personally, it's like, you have to take that accountability for what you have done, what's your role in things, you know, and then once you see your role and you fully flesh that out, then, you know, you can really release the entire thing, like you were saying, you know. Otherwise you're holding yourself, like you were saying, these guys holding yourself hostage to this guilt and beating yourself up and morbid self-reflection, you know, and you just get stuck in that loop forever, which is not a good place to be. And for me, there was a part of me that loved that, bro, you know, and still there is a part of me that loves that beating myself up shit. And like, you know, because if you're in a mindset where you're beating yourself up or feeling guilty, or, oh, I did this and I did that, I'm a bad person, I'm, you know, whatever, that can lead to kind of what you were saying, co-signing behaviors that would continue that, you know, morbid self-reflection. You know, if I'm a piece of shit, then I can do this action because that's what a piece of shit would do. Right. And so that's that cycle that I was in for a long time, and I still see myself sometimes going into that to an extent. But that's like that's how I feel about all that.
Dude, I that's huge, man. And this brings up a killer point that I think hopefully people can relate to. And that's something that I still struggle with, right? And everybody does, right? Like there's stuff that I've got going on in my world right now that I'm like, okay, I probably should be accountable for it, number one. And number two, I gotta forgive myself for it, because if not, I'm gonna start down a path of self destruction. So I remember I was at school, and I at the time I was in physical therapy school, and I was with a friend, and me and him had gotten really close during this time at the school. Well, he had actually killed himself in the middle of our school semester. And at that time, I was sober for like 10 years. You know, I was in a good place, whatever. And when he did that, uh, we found out about it, everything. All of a sudden, all this guilt came on me. Oh, I should have reached out to him more. Man, I should have been nicer to him. Man, I should have blah, blah, blah. Shoulda, woulda, coulda, right? Where I'm going through all those different mindsets. But at the time, I was in tune enough to know to watch my mind. And as soon as I started doing that, the next thought that popped in my head was, I got to go get high.
Mm.
And it was one, two. It was just like boom, boom. And so
Mhm.
once I realized that connection, I go, nope, I got to forgive myself. I didn't know. I don't know the future. I didn't know he was going to do this. And I'm not going to dwell in guilt. I'm going to learn from it. I'm going to try to watch out for other friends in the future. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to take on this guilt out of whatever ego trip I'm on, because ultimately, if we think we know everything, like if I thought I knew the future about my friend going to kill himself, like ultimately that would make me God. And I'm not God, right? Because I don't know the future. And so it's an ego trip. It's us thinking that we're better than we are or greater than we are. I'm just a human. I don't know the future. So if I can take off that burden off my shoulders and be like, wow, like I'll sit with it, I'll learn from it, but not take on that guilt, then I don't really have the need for the high, which is trying to separate me from the guilt, right?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so there's a book. I don't know if any of you guys have ever studied A Course in Miracles. It's a very deep psychological book. It's a spiritual book, but they basically said the guiltless mind cannot suffer. And what they're saying in that is, as we release our own self-hatred, we actually decrease our amount of suffering. But there's a paradox there, right? Because the accountability needs to be there. It's always the paradox, always the middle path. It's never just one way or the other. Because you can be sociopathic in your thinking and be like, oh, I don't feel any guilt, and just go around and do whatever. But I would argue those people actually are suffering in their own unique ways as well.
Mm.
But with that said, I think having the accountability, but also being able to self-forgive is such a huge fundamental part of our recovery. Because if not, we're going to need something that to actually get us high to keep us from ourselves, right? And so we're always just trying to hide from ourselves, hide from our own negative thoughts, hide from our own negative thinking. But if we've cured that negative thinking by just being compassionate to ourselves, we're not going to need that high as much, right?
Yeah. I love that. And too, for me, because I think that I need a little bit more. I can't just be told like, "Hey, be compassionate to yourself," because I was so
Mm-hmm.
deep that self-hate was so ingrained, very
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
ingrained
yeah.
in me at a young age, not accepting who I am, not accepting where I came from,
Mm-hmm.
no acceptance of myself really at all. And so I needed to do like a lot what you do is that action step. You know what I mean? I needed to take actions. I needed to write things down. I needed to work with another person in recovery, my sponsor, and I needed to do a little bit more because I've never been, especially, I've never been someone where if they told me to do it, I would, you say go right, you go, if you said go right, I'd go left just to spite you, it didn't even matter
Right.
if, that was someone that I respected or not. It was just like, I'm going to do it my way, me. And you're talking about a lot about like, a higher power, and a trust in a God. And for me, I think everyone has their own higher power or something. And that's so vital. I was just talking to my roommate last night about like explaining like what my trust in a higher power has really relieved me of so much. Like I can't even like a full wholeheartedly trusting in my higher power, because like that is taking my control and my self-will and my control of things, like you were saying, out of my hands. It's no longer Mitch's world. It's like my higher power working through meeting you, working through meeting Andrew, working through the people I interact with on a daily level. It's like those, when I fully believe that I see my higher power in all things, it's so relieving, because it's like, if I get cut off, it's like you can break it down all the way to that. Like, oh, that's just like, that's a little challenge or whatever. However you want to break it up for yourself, but it is relieving to
Yeah.
not
No,
have that control.
I totally agree. I totally agree. Yeah. And that's a huge, again, it's that paradox of everything, right? Because well, I love the serenity prayer, right? God grant me the serenity to accept things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can. And what it sounds like coming from your story a little bit is that when you are actually taking the disciplined steps where you're like, hey, I'm going to get a sponsor, hey, I'm going to do these things, you started kind of building that self-confidence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's ultimately what I try to teach, like with my program, right? Is building discipline, and that discipline ends up building your self-confidence, which ends up building your own self-love, right? So once you build that self-love, then you stop self-sabotaging and you start doing things to better your life in all ways. The more intelligent pleasure seeking, as we say, seeking out the more long-term pleasures that are going to make you enjoy life in a deeper degree. The pleasures of fatherhood, or the pleasures of a good relationship, or the pleasures of feeling good in your body, the pleasures of success, or trying to create success in your life. Um, and it sounds like that was kind of your walk, where it's like you did take the steps and the things that you could control, but then the things you couldn't control, you were able to kind of offer that up to the higher power and
100%.
let go of some of that burden you had on your shoulders.
100%.
So shame and guilt, right? Like you talk a lot about that, and I think that's like one of the most powerful tools for the addict, right? Is being able to feel like when I felt like I don't think I could really identify like in the at least the final years of my like heavy addiction. Like I don't think I could identify another real like emotion that I felt any more than shame and guilt about my actions. And because of that, like it became a powerful weapon. Like I weaponized it against myself and against others. Like I'm shameful and guilty, so I'm gonna just be alone. Or like I'm not gonna
Right.
go.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do these things that pull me further away from people. Or like I'm shameful and guilty about the person that I am and the things that I've done, and there's no changing it, and I'm never really going to get over this shame and guilt, so I might as well just keep doing bad things. Like
Exactly. Exactly.
so when I think about it, like, and I've released some of it, right? And I'm not I'm you know I'm working through releasing all of it. I'd love to release all of it, but I think it's almost like you said in the first couple minutes here, like I'm not perfect, right? So there are going to be days like when, even after I think I've released all of this shit, that like it comes back and I'm feeling
Right.
it. And that's
Right.
like, and those are the things that I've started to realize, like, even though I do the steps, or I have a sponsor, or I'm working this mode of recovery or that mode of recovery, or I'm doing therapy or whatever, like there are going to be days when I wake up and all those feelings are just there, like because that's the way that, like,
Yeah.
for me, that's just the way that, like, because of, and maybe it's going to change. I'm 2 years into this, a little under 2 years into this, like, and maybe it will change, but for now, like, because I spent so much time like conditioning myself emotionally this way, in the time that I've reprogrammed my brain, like it's not a full reprogram, right? Like it's going to take a long time for me to just be able to, like, through and through, like, constantly not be bombarded by whatever it is, like those feelings, and it almost creates like a craving to isolate, um and really like to recede into myself. So I don't know. I just when I hear like it's interesting hearing you talk about pleasures, right? And I don't know if you're into like stoicism or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's a philosophy and like a way of thinking that I've been shown and that I actually kind of jive with, even though like when you hear the word stoic, it's like it makes it sound like, oh, yeah, like it's an unemotional person, or it's a person that's like it doesn't respond to like things and like just has a stone face and whatever. Like, but stoicism for me is like it's helped me deal with a lot of like traumatic things. You know, you talk about overdoses and suicides, and I think we've all experienced those, but that's really traumatic for the addict. And I had the same reaction. Like it was like, oh, what could I have done? Why didn't I do this better? I need to go get high.
Right.
Like,
Right.
and I don't know, like when you speak about pleasures, I don't know if this the same thing happens to you, Mitch, but for me, like it's almost like my immediate thought, because of the way that I've been conditioned, is like I don't I'm like, oh no, like pleasure is bad for me. I need to stay away from pleasure. Like that word like just has like a crazy connotation in my head of like, oh, like pleasures for me are bad. Like I need to stay serious and stay on this path of like healing and digging up all this emotional stuff and doing all this work and whatever. But like I really appreciate the way that you almost reframe what pleasure is. Like because the way that pleasure was for me was like short-term pleasure, and it was all about getting high and doing something wrong. Like
Right.
so I don't know. It's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's interesting to hear that.
Well, and I love that you brought that up because there's so much there, right? There's so much to uncover in that what you're saying. Sorry, switch views here. It was getting a little hectic outside my house with some mowing going on, and you may hear a kiddo scream in the background that my wife is helping. So anyway, this is life, right? So but no, like you there's a lot to unpack there. And I think the big thing that I like to say as far as like reframing pleasure is uh I think that's important for the addict to know that hey, you're not just gonna live this like super harsh and for lack of a better word, like stoic life. Like I love
Mm,
stoicism because I think if we're on a spectrum between purpose and pleasure, uh it's always the middle path, right? Because you get David Goggins over here who is pure purpose, no pleasure, like goes to bed on an ice block, wakes up at 2 in the morning. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that, right? Like that's not what I enjoy, in this life, and I don't necessarily want to be that, but I appreciate it. And people like him, they come out into this world where everybody's on the other end of the spectrum. Everybody's pleasure seeking. I need to watch 9 hours of Netflix at night and eat my Twinkies and drink my wine at night and
Twinkies are
do my
good though.
drugs, whatever, and so if we could just bring that spectrum over a little bit, which I think that's why it's so important to have people like Goggins in our world and in our life, is because they do bring us out of that a little bit. And so the ultimate center path, I think, is the ultimate pleasure because
Mm.
you're feeling the purpose, you're feeling the love for yourself, you're releasing a lot of this guilt that you're holding on, but you're also still enjoying your life and you're enjoying your body and you're enjoying your senses. You're not just sitting in a dark room in a cave, in a deep meditative state, never experiencing life. So I think there is that balance there. And for me, the idea of giving the addict, somebody who's going through that time, the insight on, hey, this life can actually be amazing. Life can be, because sometimes I think with people that are in recovery that I've seen, and I've thought this way as well, is like I thought to myself, well, maybe I'll just be able to get to normal, right? Maybe I'll just be able to, whatever normal is, of course, maybe I'll just be able to get to zero. And if I could just get to zero and just make it through this life, then right on, like I just made it through without turning into blowing my own life up and killing myself on drugs, which sometimes that's a
mhm.
great goal and that's where we need to start. But I think having a deeper vision of saying, hey, what would my life be like if I could really exude such a deep confidence and consciously congruent thinking, where my conscience and my thinking were so aligned, and I had released so much of my guilt, so much of my fears, and I had was able to take on so much courage in my own heart, and experience things that I never thought possible, and experience gifts I never thought possible, and give to people I never thought possible. And you know what I mean? And just have this higher vision for your life. I think sometimes that'll help motivate us towards recovery, right? Because if we just think we're just gonna, okay, well, maybe I'll just sit in my room alone the rest of my life, and and that's it. That's my recovery. It's not a very pretty vision to have, right? From that. So
Yeah, that's true. I, as you guys were talking, I was thinking, calling it back to that discipline piece, which kind of goes along with, like, you got the Goggins, and then you got the willy nilly, and then everything there in the middle. And I think, like, for me, the discipline piece has been huge. Like, I grew up with no father, so I didn't have like an immediate father figure. Not to say that my mother didn't try to instill discipline into me. She did, but I revolted against that, and there was no one else there to check me, and it was just me and her. And so early on, I kind of developed, especially towards adolescence, like, I can get away with anything, nothing's bad's going to happen. I can do what I want. I can, my mom would tell me, don't leave the house, after a certain time, like, middle school and stuff. And I was revolting to no real consequences, or at least consequences that I respected at the time, and was very disrespectful to her, and especially throughout high school. And there was never, like I said, a consequence or any sort of like discipline to me. I just kind of was like, this is my world, and I'm going to do whatever I want, and you can try to stop me. Good luck. And when I started getting drugs, or drinking and drugs, that started getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and the only discipline I really got was from my sport, was through swimming. I had a coach there that I respected, and at the time, or not at the time, still. And then, there was a scheduled practice that I had to go to, and I enjoyed going to. So that was my first semblance of discipline. But I think my real discipline, to be honest with you, has come through when I started getting into AA and being around other men that were older than me in recovery, like all kind of like miniature father figures. I've always taken note of, like, because I didn't have that father piece, right? I've always been in a place of looking to my friends' families, or men that I respected, seeing what they do, how they act, how they carry themselves, and I've gotten a lot out of learning by watching through other people. And so when I finally bought into AA and started going to this, there's a reason I go to a men's group that's all older guys. I've been trying to figure out how to be a man this whole time. You know what I mean? And so I've learned so much through them, and and with the AA touch to it, I've developed to this point a disciplined schedule, and something that has like really regimented and like solidified my recovery, because I really feel in the last year finally coming into a place where I don't need, like, it's that accountability piece too. It's like, I used to need like my friends to like check me, and if you didn't check me, I probably wouldn't do it. And like, I always said, like, I benefited from coaching, where you would like yell at me and be like, get your shit together. And then I'd have a great response. And then, some time would go on, and I'd start to fall off the wagon again, and then get yelled at again. And then I'd be on my shit for a little bit. But I've started to grow that accountability piece within myself. And it's really through AA, to be honest. So, thank God I finally am starting to get somewhere close to that. You know what I mean?
Well, that's so powerful. And I don't know if you guys ever saw that. There was that Rogan podcast where he had I think it was a psychologist on there, but she was talking about that when they were, everybody suffers in this world, right? Like, we think it's just the addicts who are suffering. And what I've learned in my work is everybody suffers. And I've yet to meet somebody who isn't suffering in some level. Right. And the only difference to me is addicts deal with it through through drugs, right? And the other people will deal with it in other ways. Sometimes they deal with it in food addictions or sex addiction. I mean, the list goes on, right? Or they they just self-sabotage their lives. They do things to mess up their lives. And so, but what I love about what you just said there is the mentoring piece, that you're looking for mentors and you're looking for people around that. Is she basically said on that interview that she goes, some of the most healthy people she's met, because like we said, everybody suffers in this world. She said some of the most healthy people she's met are people who are in recovery. And it's because they've got a practice that they implement, right? Like the big book is phenomenal. It's on a high spiritual level. Like it's probably one of the deepest books as far as practical application, how to live a better life. It's almost like life instruction, right? Like, so
Right.
to have that and access to that and have other people who are trying to live that and be in a group of that, the amount of people who actually have that type of influence in their life is probably at like a 0.0001%. So to
Mhm.
see that you guys and other addicts are actually following a path where you're learning from mentors, learning from people's struggles, and having a community like that is really a recipe to have a very self-actualized person that can really accomplish big things in the world. And a lot of the addicts out there that I've seen, that I've learned from and grown from, are people who have done amazing things with their lives. And it's because they've had this practical application, they've had this humility to learn from others, right? And the ability to soak in good knowledge from people around them. When if you don't hit rock bottom, you probably don't have that. You kind of got life figured out by yourself and you just kind of suffer in silence, right? But if you've hit rock bottom and you know what that's like, you're open enough to learn so many valuable lessons from other people. And so I applaud that. And I think it's really a path of success in life. Like I really do. I think it's a huge step to really becoming the best version of ourselves. And to me, that's our purpose here, right? Like, so everybody's wanting to know what their purpose is in life. Is it to save the whales? Is it to, whatever, feed the children, blah, blah, blah. Those are all great. Like I have nothing against that. But I think everybody's universal purpose in life is to become the best unique version of themselves, to exude that, whatever that is, whatever that is in your calling. Like we all know it in our heart. Like I can't tell you what your best version is. You can't tell me what my, something I have in my own psyche, my own conscience, my own soul's destiny. It's probably part of my DNA, part of my spiritual DNA. And as we connect with that and we give that as a gift to the world, becoming that best version of ourselves, because again, people learn from what you do, not from what we say, right? Like it's not the reposting of some, thing on Instagram that's going to change the world. It's becoming your best version of yourself, and somebody seeing that and being like, damn, I didn't know that was possible, right? And then they become their best version. So at the end of the day, if I wake up every morning knowing, hey, this is my purpose today. My purpose is to be the best person I can possibly be and align with my own conscience in the best way possible. It gives me, number one, motivation. It gives me purpose in life, which a lot of people are lacking purpose in this world. What's the meaning? Why are we here? Blah, blah, blah. Here's your purpose, brother. Like you becoming your best version of yourself. And when you have that purpose, it gives you happiness, right? Because I think purpose is a precursor to happiness, and you'll feel good every day because you're pushing your boundaries, you're pushing your comfort zone, you're going out and trying new things, you're learning from new people, you're overcoming the ease of distractions and addictions and stuff, and you're actually using discipline to implement those things in your life. So but yeah, I love kind of where your head's at with that. So yeah, keep it up, brother.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So along those lines, even like as I hear you speak, like I can hear the coach in you. Like it's
Yeah.
it's pretty crazy. Like
Yeah.
you're like encouraging both of us. All of a sudden, this is like it almost feels good. It's almost like a session, and I'm feeling pretty confident about myself. It's great. But like in all seriousness, um, along those lines, like I'd love to hear. I think we both would like to hear like a little bit about how you got started, like in the coaching, because now like I'm trying to track Joe's timeline here, and like he's
Yeah.
getting sober, and then he spends 10 years going to prison as like a
Mhm.
spiritual coach, and kind of take me through that to like, all right, now where you're at now with the like the fitness coaching, the mindset coaching, and all of that good stuff.
Yeah, no doubt. And it is kind of a confusing timeline. So I'll kind of summarize it. And there's a big piece I kind of left out I haven't talked about yet. So it was about 18 years ago that I got sober and I just quit everything. And on that path, I got really deep into spirituality. I spent a lot of time studying Eastern philosophy to the point where I was literally contemplating being a monk. I was connected to a temple, and they had a lot of people who took sannyasi and took that type of mindset. So it was very disciplined, very help. I mean, they were extremely disciplined, more disciplined than I am now, right? Like a very high level. And I was able to learn from these people who lived that lifestyle, like what that meant and what that gave me, which what it really gave me was a deep vision of my soul, if that makes sense. And the reason why is as soon as we make a decision out of our body's senses, right? Like for example, I go out and I see a lady who's struggling, like some lady trying to cross the road, and I go out of my way to help her cross that road, right? It has no benefit to me as a individual, right? That's not going to help me, in any way. It's not going to get me food. It's not going to gratify my senses. It's not, no, but it's actually gratifying my soul, right?
So
So
it
if
is.
I'm doing something out of my bodily senses to benefit somebody else or to even benefit myself on a higher level, we actually, our identity shifts from just being a physical body to a soul, if that makes sense. And once we actually remember that's our true identity, we're eternal, we're connected, we're loved, blah, 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 then our confidence kind of comes back. So anyway, that's a weird tangent, but they really helped me connect to my soul, if that makes sense, through the discipline. Then I spent several years doing that. And then I really got into the jail ministry, which was a little different. And that was like the spiritual counseling and stuff like that. And that was more through like a Christian style church. And again, I'm very open spiritually. I'm not, dogmatic in any way, but that was kind of the method I was able to use. And again, I saw that if once you get people past their own self-sabotage and self-hatred, they end up making better decisions, and they end up not hurting other people and not hurting themselves. But it's that initial step of knowing, hey, you're loved. And a lot of these guys don't have any good mentors in their life. They struggle with that. And then here's the big kicker. So my only sister, I have one sister, she actually died of a overdose slash suicide. And that was very pivotal in my life. And that happened about a little over 7 years ago. And when that happened, what was interesting was it was just me and her, right, in the family. But I saw what I learned from that experience was what not to do, how not to think, how not to live, how not to interact in a lot of ways. Now, she was a great person. Like she definitely had a lot of things going for her. She was very smart, she was very intelligent, pretty girl, blah, blah, blah. But she also had a lot of the things that addicts struggle with. And one of those big things was self-hatred, self-guilt, self-sabotage. And it's really interesting because I always remember the story. There was one time she tried to do that, and she had called us and said, "Hey, I'm thinking of killing myself. I want you guys to come out and help me." And we're like, "Okay, of course." So me and my mom went out there and talked to her, and she had written a list of all the horrible things she had done in her entire life, all that she could remember. And she basically said, "I'm a terrible person. I don't deserve to live." And I'm looking at this list and I'm like, what the hell are you doing? Right? Where focus goes, energy flows. So if me and you sat down and decided to make a list of all the terrible things, you know how horrible we would feel about our lives and
Yeah.
about ourselves. And so and a lot of times what we process in the world, what we experience in the world is due to the questions we ask ourselves, right? So if I wake up every day and say, what's wrong with me today? Why am I such a terrible person? My brain's going to give me an answer. Well, because you're an idiot and because you suck. But if I ask myself
Hmm.
a better question, what can I be grateful for in my life? What am I proud of myself in my life? My brain's going to give me an answer too. So the questions really define our thinking. And the question she was asking was, why am I such a terrible person? She went down and wrote this huge list. So anyway, we're taking her to the hospital, and actually going to the ER with her, to help her get some care. And she looks at me and she goes, "I'm so sorry." And I thought she was talking about, "I'm so sorry because she pulled us out of bed. It was like 11 at night, and we're bringing her to the hospital." And I'm like, "What are you sorry for?" She goes, when you were 13, I never took you to school when I could have taken you to school." And I'm like, "What the fuck?" Like, I was just like, "Are you kidding me?" Like, I don't care. That is totally, but the amount of self-hatred, the amount of self-guilt she had was just so deep and so ingrained that I just know for recovery and for living a better life, I just can't go down that route, right? Like, we can learn from our mistakes, and it is that paradox there where you don't want to just be blindly doing things and hurting yourself and hurting other people. And I think there's a difference between like healthy guilt and unhealthy guilt, but she was in such a state of unhealthy guilt, unhealthy self-hatred, that she basically did that. And so after that happened, I doubled down on my self-care. And I knew, hey, these are things that I know benefit me. Working out, I know reading every day benefits me. I know having a spiritual connection benefits me. I know having connection with other people I admire and look up to benefit me. And so I really doubled down on that. I've created several businesses. I'm a real estate investor. I mean, I've got a coaching business, I've got a physical therapy business, massage business, and I'm able to live a pretty healthy, happy life, like by all accounts, by my own experience. And what's good about that is I think it gives us the paradox there between the two opportunities in life. And a lot of times when we're looking at people who struggle with maybe mental illness or struggle with addiction, we'll say, well, it's just purely genetic. And I do think there's a component to that. But I also had this very similar genetics to my sister. But the only difference was I made different decisions. And I think it's important for people to realize that, because sometimes if they think, well, this is just my genetics, this is just my DNA, my dad was like this, or my parents were like this, and therefore I'm going to be like this.
Ooh.
I think it almost is, number one, it can be a cop out because it makes them think, well, this is it. And number two, it can be very self-defeating where you literally are a victim of your own genes, right? And so it was kind of cool to have both of our lives end in grow in a different direction, because I think it just shows that our habits can reframe our brain, reframe our thinking, reframe our life in such a amazing way that hopefully it helps other people that may be going through it as well.
Thank you for sharing that about your sister. Uh, that sounds like a very hard experience, obviously, and I'm sorry for your loss even to this point.
Mhm.
But I think that what you were just saying there at the end spurred something in me. I have two things for you.
Yeah,
One of my favorite things I've ever heard in a meeting, like probably in the last year, was this guy was talking about the story that we tell ourselves, and
yeah.
the story, how powerful the story that we tell ourselves is,
Yeah.
because it's kind of like the theme of what we've been talking about today. It's like, um, this it's just super trippy because my meeting on Tuesday this week, he actually said it again, and he hadn't until the last time I heard him say it, like 6 months ago. But he was like, he was sharing that for him a couple of years ago, he was telling a story, and like his like war story and about the drugs he did and like how hard it was and how bad he was, and like, poor
Mm,
woe is me, I'm so bad, I've done all this bad things. And apparently some OG came up to him in the meeting and was like, stop telling your story.
mm,
He said, stop telling your story in meetings. That's not who you are today. That's not who you are anymore. You're working at 12 steps. That may have been your story, and that
right.
that is part of your past, but like, stop telling it. And we like to remember things how we remember them. You know what I mean? And so,
Yeah.
like, we are the story we tell ourselves too. And so, like, looking at everything in a fair and just lens is very hard for us. Looking at everything in totality. What did I do? What did they do? How did I get there? All that stuff is a hard thing for us to fully remember. It's much easier. Like, one of the guys was saying, like, I'll find the bad in every story. So, like,
Mm,
he was saying, if I go to the Super Bowl and my team wins, I'm gonna come back and tell you that I lost my wallet. You know what I mean? It's
mm,
something like that, where it's like, I'm gonna find the bad in whatever, to continue that cycle of morbid reflection.
right.
And I think that's a super important thing to always be aware of. Like, what story are you telling yourself? Because you're going to be that story. You know what I mean? And you're going to act through that lens. So if it's a negative story, you're going to act negatively, like kind of how you were saying. But what I wanted to ask you about your sister was, it sounds like she got stuck, in a fourth step, writing down all the people she had harmed and stuff. So I was wondering if, or an amends or something like that. Was she working a program or something like that through AA?
No, she was not. And at that point she was on a half dozen medications and drinking. And when she finally did cross over, that was basically what they found in her system was about 9 different substances. So
Man.
not in any healthy sense of the word for sure. But
Yeah.
I've got goosebumps right now with what you're saying about the story because um basically, so if you guys check out my profile or whatever, the book I wrote in there, and I wrote it with a friend, was called The Storyteller. And basically what that is about is the story we tell our own lives. And it's basically about an orphan boy who is trying to figure out his story, right? And so he goes through life and he meets different people, and different people are like, oh, your story could be this or your story could be that. And depending on who he listens to, for example, somebody tells him, oh, this is great. You got life at your fingertips. You can do whatever you want. You're an orphan, blah, blah, blah. So he gets excited. And then somebody comes up to him and tells him, oh, that's so sad. You're an orphan. Your family didn't love you, blah, blah,
Mhm.
blah. And guess what? He feels depressed, right?
Yep.
So his whole reality shifts based on the story he believes himself until he meets a man who shows him and teaches him and says, you are the storyteller.
Mm.
Like whatever story you're telling about yourself, you're going to believe and it's going to be true. And that's going to be your experience. And so that's a huge, huge thing right there. I mean, is being able to interpret our stories. And the biggest shift for me was being able to interpret my story from a spiritual perspective. Again, it's not dogmatic, it's not religious, but it's looking at everything through the eyes of eternity in a sense of like, okay, I'm a spiritual being having a temporary human experience right now. How does that shift my entire story about everything, right? Like even the passing of my sister, right? Like when that happened, I had done a lot of spiritual work and I was able to process it in a much different way than I think a lot of people around me. And part of that, and I think people were like, wow, like how are you processing this so well, or how are you not just completely wrecked? And I was still on my habits. I was still doing the positive things in my life after that happened. I mean, of course I went through the grieving process, of course it was tough, but I was able to live in a still a very would be the word, like positive habit way after that happened. I didn't kind of go into a spiral. And the reason was because the story I was able to tell myself about that experience was, okay, well, she checked out. Like, I'm not going to see her again for a while, but I eventually will see her again. Like, I truly believe we're eternal beings. And we even know that scientifically, right? Like, energy is never created nor destroyed, and basically everything, all matter is broken down to energy. It's only transformed. It's the first law of thermodynamics. It's not even like woo woo spirituality. So, looking at everything from a deep spiritual perspective, it shifts your story around a lot. And to your point, what you're saying, that addict that just kept telling the story, oh, I'm just a piece of crap, I'm just this, I'm just that. Guess what kind of life he's going to live, and guess what kind of decisions he's going to make. But once we're able to really find our true story, which I think comes from self-reflection, comes from mentoring, comes from positive reading and all these different things and discipline, then we're able to completely shift our outlook and we're able to live a different life because our story is therefore different.
Definitely.
Mhm.
100%.
Sorry, I was on mute. There's also a lot going on outside my windows right now, construction and everything else. But thank you for sharing that with us. And
Yeah.
and like again, to echo Mitch, I am sorry for your loss even today.
Yeah.
Death is difficult, and all of the forms of grieving and the whole grieving process is ongoing.
I
But I
appreciate that.
think it's kind of crazy, like that you're a theme I get as we're talking to you is like, and it's really just kind of insane how it's mirrored in the dynamic between you and your sister. It's like I think through this whole hour that we've been talking, like you've done this thing, like one side of the extreme, other side of the extreme, and then middle ground.
Right.
You've done that like 4 or 5 times. Every
Right.
single time it's been applicable, and it's been about a different, like,
Mm.
either part of our habits or discipline or spirituality or like whatever. And then we have your sister and you, like
Mm. Mm.
like and we like it's the same,
Yeah.
it's almost the same dynamic, right? Where like almost like you say, when we use genetics as a cop out, or as the reason of like, oh, this is why I'm screwed up and why I'm never going to be fixed, and my parents this and that, and
Right.
like you guys are handed pretty much the same soup,
Yeah.
and like it, you see how our choices and how we view ourselves changes our entire reality. So I think like when we have, all the reasons in the world to like just kind of cop out or to blame it on other things, like, we are a product of our choices. Like we're a product of our mindset, our choices, our thoughts. And not even that, like we're a product of the thoughts that we choose to respond to. Because I get like
Mm.
fucked up thoughts all the time.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
but
Mhm.
it's what I respond to and what I decide to act on.
Right.
And I don't know if you caught Mitch giving me a look when you said you were thinking about becoming a monk.
Oh yeah.
But he
Mhm.
was giving me a look because I called him the other day. Um, and I don't know if you're into Plum Village or Thich Nhat Hanh or any of that
Oh yeah.
stuff.
Hmm. Oh yeah.
But I've been kind of on like a big kick with that and Buddhism
Yeah.
and meditation um and I was like, dude, I think I was like fed up with the day or whatever, and I was like, dude, you know what? I think I just want to be a monk. Like I think I'm just gonna apply here, um and then he gave me some good advice, and some other people gave me some good advice, and again here it was like the real world, being a monk, and they were like, why don't you go on a month-long retreat
Yeah.
instead? Why don't you walk the
Yeah.
middle path and just do a little of both, go on a month-long retreat and get a little taste of it.
Right.
So I just think it was like, it's kind of poetic. I got kind of chills when you were like, yeah, and then I wanted to be a monk, and I was like, oh fuck, I want to be a monk.
That's awesome, bro. That's so awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, the synchronicities in this are phenomenal. And just kind of where your guys' heads are at. And I love that because, spirituality has been a huge, huge help in my life. And but you're right. Like at the end of the day, the point you're making originally is like it's all about choices, and how we're choosing to think. And same way, like I have fucked up thoughts come in my head. Like I don't know if you guys ever struggle with anxiety, but anxiety comes, and when it comes, all of a sudden, all these like negative thoughts will start coming with it, right? Like people think it's like the
Hmm.
raising heart rate that comes, or the whatever. No, it's all the fucked up shit that your mind starts thinking when you're in an anxious state. And what the difference between I think people who do well with that and people who don't are the people who do well don't believe the things that they're thinking, or the people who don't believe deeply in the things they're thinking. Because when those negative thoughts start coming in, oh, I'm the worst person, I'm the negative person, and my life's going to be negative, and everything's going to turn to shit, and blah blah blah. That person that's believing that person's going to struggle. Where the person's like, oh, it's just my anxiety, whatever. It's going to think thoughts, but I'm going to not latch onto them, like you're saying, which I think is a huge, huge thing that Buddhism, ultimately teaches is detachment from our thoughts and being able to observe them. But yeah, I love that, dude. And what I realized in my path of wanting to be a monk, and literally, like, I mean, there was years where I would spend about 3 hours meditating. So we did a thing called japa, where you would do these beads, and it would take several hours to go through your whole japa in the morning. And I was in a very good spiritual place. I was very peaceful at that time in my life, but I wasn't really creating. And I remember one time I was at the temple, it was a late night and it was kind of the end of the night. And I'm like in my early mid 20s, whatever. And I remember kind of watching things go around me and all this activity happening and having this feeling like I'm here for more. Like it was almost like, why did you incarnate in this body if you're just gonna hang out in heaven all day long? Like,
Mm.
you know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
I
you
like
came
that.
here to experience duality. You came here to experience relationships. You came here to experience the struggle. You came here to experience. And so for me, that was kind of again the middle path there, where I spiritually and mentally I try to live in that place all the time, knowing that ultimately everything's okay. ultimately I'm loved. Ultimately, when I cross over, everything's going to be fine, right? Like I'm not like scared to death or worried about those, those type of things help, through that process, especially the meditation, blah, blah, blah. But I'm also still experiencing life. Like I'm still experiencing my body. I'm still experiencing ego gratification, enjoying, success, enjoying happiness, enjoying, different things in life, sex, and just all sorts of great, experiences. So I think again, it's that middle path, and that's basically was Siddhartha's path, right? In the story of the
Mhm.
Buddha, was he first started out, having however much money he had. He was a prince. He had tons of women, tons of experiences, tons of things at his fingertips, and then he let that to be the aesthetic life, where he just cut off all of life, right? He just completely separated himself from life, and then finally he discovers that that's not it either, and then he finds the middle path. And there's a really cool picture that I love it, and it's called the Three Men Tasting Soup. And it's actually a picture that's in China. You'll see it. Now, one of them is tasting the soup, and he's saying he's got a bad look on his face. He's got like it's a bitter taste. Now, that person was Confucius, and Confucius's philosophy was unless the mat is straight, the master will not sit. So
Mhm.
Confucius was very into making the world perfect, making everything perfect. He was very like almost like a type A, type of person. Then you got the other one, the Buddha, and he's like looking away. He's like pretending like he's not tasting it. And that's the idea of, detachment from the world. I'm going to completely separate myself from this world. I'm not experiencing this. I'm somewhere else. I'm in nirvana while the world is over here. And then the final one is Lao Tzu, which if you ever read the
Mhm.
Tao Te Ching, he's sitting
Mhm.
there and he's tasting it and he's smiling. And he's got a big old grin on his face because he is tasting all that is life. He's in a detached state like the Buddha, but he's also in a experiencing heaven on earth like Confucius. So he's experiencing the uniqueness, the beauty of the issues in our life, right? Like of the problems in our life. And a lot of times people are looking at the world and they go, God, there's so many problems. It's so horrible. Look at all the negativity in this world. Look at all the horrible things that happen. But if we look at like the world almost like a video game, right? Like if you had a video game and you had all the cheat codes and you never had any problems, like what would be the point of playing the game in the first place, right? Like you would just
Exactly.
be like, oh, I'm done. I got the princess, I'm I hammered it out. But we play the game for the problems, with the problems, in the solutions. We come in here with our issues. We come in here with our family dramas. We come in here with our tendencies towards addictions, tendencies towards negativity, and that actually gives us the gift of trying to push through it, right? Like, and sometimes people think our negative thoughts, our negative experiences in life are our burden that we have to carry and that we have to deal with. To me, they're our gift, because if I was the type of person who just instantly thought positively all day long, I didn't have to do my disciplines, I didn't have to work out, I didn't have to speak, I didn't have to help other people. If that was my life and I could just watch TV the rest of my life, my experience level would be so low. So the fact that
Mhm.
every day I have to wake up and do these things on a continual basis is actually my gift, because I know that if I was, content just being nothing, then I would have been nothing. But the fact that I want to grow, I want to change, I want to help, I want to become more, that's actually my gift. And to have that burden of the constant growth, and the constant trying to overcome negativity, if you will.
Yeah. Amen to that. In that picture that you're referencing, all I
Mm.
wrote down is present moment of recovery. That's why we named it present
Mm,
moment. He's
I love it.
experiencing, yeah, being in the present is a heightened level of meditation.
Mhm.
If you can fully be in that present moment. And so
Yeah,
uh
with all
the
your shit, with all your negativity, with all your guilt, with all your mistakes, right? But still
yeah,
pushing forward, and still trying to overcome it.
yeah, amen.
Mhm.
Just trying to
Yeah.
be right here, right now, as best we can. And if you're going too far forward or too far backward, learning how to understand that that's happening and then call yourself back to right now.
Yeah, man.
Definitely takes a lot of practice.
Yeah.
But I did want to say thank you so much.
Dude,
It's
thank you
been
guys.
fucking pleasure, bro. This has been pretty sick, and we got some high level stuff on this one, which was fucking awesome to actually talk about.
Dude,
I'm
same.
not as well read as you guys, but I did like listening to you guys talking about that stuff. And definitely something that I should probably get more into for sure. But
Dude, it's really cool, especially like with you, Andrew, and your path as well. Like I think we can relate a lot on that. Like and Mitch, with your just kind of humility through the whole thing. I think both of you guys got a really cool dynamic with the podcast in general. And I think just being able to see it from both ends is so cool, you know. So I appreciate you guys having me on.
thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate your perspective, and I learned a lot today. So,
Facts.
Same.
I'm grateful. I'm grateful to have had you on and just to be able to chop it up with two knowledgeable guys, man.
Hell yeah, guys. Hell yeah. I appreciate you guys. Keep
Yeah,
on
well,
doing
thank
the
you.
good work. Yep.
Appreciate you. And everyone listening, appreciate y'all. We're on our way to 100 subscribers, which is pretty cool. So get there at some point. But thank you so much for listening. This has been episode 26. Thank you again to
Half a
Joe.
year.
Yeah, half a year, 6 months of 6 months of episodes, which is pretty sick, which is in the middle from the beginning to
Oh,
a year.
shit.
So boom,
Yeah,
there
man.
we
I
go,
mean,
boys.
how more synchronistic can you get, bro?
There we go. Thank
Love
you
it.
so much, Joe. And we will keep coming back. Love y'all.